This is the last of the Cyber Fridays. And this week we're going to focus on SCADA panel. If you're not familiar with what SCADA is, I'll let the experts here discuss a little bit more about what those things are. I'm Gary Sparks. I'm the program director for MCC. Guillermo Rosas is my partner in crime. We're working together to further develop the program and be able to get a designation through NSA that will since be able to complete the program and go to UNO or Bellevue to do their 4Y. So first of all, we'll start out and let the panelists introduce themselves, tell you a little bit about their background, and then we'll go from there. Start with you, Captain.
Thank you, sir. Hey, good afternoon, everyone. So I'm Captain Gregory Bays. I'm with the Nebraska Army National Guard. I do work for the Guard full-time, but then I also do the standard Guard drill where you go in 1 week in a month, 2 weeks out of the year or more. And so my full-time duty in the National Guard is I'm the Deputy CIO G6 for all of our information systems. And my part-time duty is very, very recently I was just selected to lead the 179 Cyber Protection Team, which is a brand new unit for the Nebraska National Guard. The Guard has two cyber elements. There's a defensive cyber element. It's called a Defensive Cyber Operations Element, DCOE, and they primarily focus on incident response and defensive measures. And then there's the Cyber Protection Team, which is still being defined. So there's going to be some intelligence roles, some counterintelligence and counter-response roles, and then they also focus on inspections and readiness. So that's my role with the National Guard in a nutshell, well, we'll go from there, sir.
Jeff Breesey, Metropolitan Utilities District. Worked in IT for about 25 years. Previously I was at OPPD, so from the SCADA side, which is basically your control system for, where I've been at nuclear, electrical, now water and gas operations. So I've been doing that for about 12 years now.
Mike Tomaszewicz from the Omaha Public Power District. Jeff, I think I'm still using your laptop. That's you using you over there.
That's all.
Yeah, well, so I'm a lead cybersecurity analyst for the, we call it the corporate side of cyber, but we integrate a lot with the operational side, right? We've got some separate, intentionally separated networks to kind of keep the day-to-day operations of the business separate from the operations of our former nuclear plant, our fire plants, all of those operational things, right? And that's where the majority of the SCADA sits. I've been with OPPD for a little over 2 years, but I've been in cyber for probably 25 years now. And one of the things that I'm really kind of focusing now, which is really timely to have this discussion, is the protections of those SCADA networks, as more and more vendors are now starting to offer IP connectivity to once was a safer, more secure protocol. So now we have all of the challenges of regular cybersecurity, but now how do we protect those operational networks with all of the SCADA controls? So it's a big concern, and it's a timely discussion, and I'm happy to be here.
All right. I'm just trying to keep these monitors active, so somebody would touch those two monitors and they'll reactivate those for me. And it was kind of a joke. I sent these guys an email earlier this week and said we would have some questions to prime the pump, as it were. So this is for each of the panelists. What types of systems are used for control for our infrastructure, and what would be the ramifications if those systems get compromised?
So that's a great question. So you talk about PLC controllers. Basically, they do the things that add the logic to control the routing of the electricity on the grid. So there are usually two ways into every grid with electricity, and one is the off leg and one is the on leg. And there are fault detectors that are on each of them. So when a tree branch hits a wire, the first thing that happens is a device called a recloser attempts to open and close that circuit. Because if a tree hits the wire and then falls off of it, the circuit is not grounded anymore, and it can reset the fuses automatically, and off it goes. If it is broken, the system, the way it's controlled, can automatically be rerouted, so the majority of your customers maintain or regain electricity while the crews can go out and restore that little fault. Right? So that's all done with logic controllers that are well protected and heavily nurtured. Right? We spend a lot of time and effort making sure that those systems are secure and that they're safe. So if they were to be compromised by an adversary, we could have an event similar to what happened in the Ukraine in 2015 and 2016, and that is loss of power to our electrical customers, loss of control to those devices that are out there. We'd have to roll trucks in order to manually reset those things so that we could get the power back to our customers. And aside from the technical problems, it's the embarrassment of having that happen and answering to our customers who in a public utility are really important to us.
With those that you're speaking of, are those internet connected? The systems that reset? Because I know with some PLCs, like Siemens PLCs, they have that option to add on a modem. I believe it's a cellular modem to be able to control the system, through radio waves. Do you guys implement things like that, or is everything hardwired?
I would say right now we're testing those types of systems and testing the controls to put on those systems to try and prevent anybody but us from having access to them. It's funny because one advertisement I saw earlier in this year, in particular in a magazine, where we're advertising the benefits and the futuristic option of being able to control a recloser with your iPhone. I don't think I want anybody being able to control any reclosers, mine or someone else's, with an iPhone. So it's the balance against the needs of the technicians and the ease of use, because we're limited resources and limited bodies and all those things, and automate, against the real world scenarios, and that is, if you're not careful, you're going to be a victim.
And I'll add, I have the unique perspective where I've been where he's at, and I also have the gas and water. It's a little different. His stuff is ones and zeros. Electricity's on or electricity's off. Very important. My stuff for the PLC is more about flow and pressure control, whether it's gas. Gas not nearly as much, but water. You'll hear about the water main breaks. Long story, but I mean, we're getting into the point where we can hopefully get some predictive analysis around that and see what may break next. But really, even water's the big one for flow control or pressure. But I like to go on top of what Mike said, where it's even more important and where things are moving towards. I think you guys are looking at them as the smart grid stuff and the two-way. That's where it gets scary, because when I was at OPPD, and I'm thinking this was probably 7 years ago, we did an initial study. Other reasons why it wasn't, why we weren't moving there at that time. But one of the things people don't think about on the back end is you have two-way data going back and forth. And what's real easy to see with that is, when do you think people are home? You see the electricity, I mean, you see this, here's the spikes, here's the low level for 8 hours, here's the spikes. Well, that's in the wrong person's hands. It's just data that people generally wouldn't think about. Yeah, it's real nice, I can control stuff with a smart meter, two-way, that sounds great, until you start thinking about all of the other things. And it goes for gas and water as well, with two-way meters. Yeah, it's great, I can remote start from, or stop, straight from, well, somebody sitting at their desk. That sounds great, but do you have the proper controls around it? I mean, that's the key, because you're going to get a flood of data, and I will say this, because I know this for a fact, Google is already asking for all the data, whether we have it or not, so I know they've already put in requests for people that have done smart grid stuff.
I mean, just for argument's sake, if you have a Nest thermostat, you're already giving it all to Google.
Yeah.
They're collecting it all. And they know more about you than you expect that they do, right? They know when you're home, when you're not home. They know what kind of appliances you run and when they run, based on what's happening to its power supply as it interacts with what's happening in your house.
That is scary. So moving forward, how do we balance, capability and accessibility with security? How do we do that in the SCADA and industrial control system environment? Because everybody does want to have remote access or remote monitoring and be able to know what's going on in real time and change things, without having to send out a whole crew or whatever it may be. But that presents a major security risk. Leading up to this talk in this class, I was watching several Robert M. Lee's of Dragos Security, focuses on ICS security, his talks, and he said there are environments he goes into, and the control network, the critical network that has all the controls on it, the people there will tell him, oh yeah, it's air gapped, and he'll hop on and ping Google and be able to ping Google, and he says that that happens more frequently than it should, and that's a big issue. So how do we balance those things going forward?
You want to take a shot?
Actually, I do.
That's outstanding. Please do.
So to speak to that question, one of the best things that collectively as an industry and as a defensive partner we need to do is develop secure baselines, right? And that's one of your difficulties in your industry, is there's not really a very well-defined set of secure baselines for all the different types of PLCs and ICS controls out there. Pardon me for saying so, but I don't even think there's a very decent vulnerability database for all of those pieces of equipment.
I mean, they all have their own.
Right.
Problem is there isn't one.
Yeah.
And so unless you're looking at 15 or 20 different sources every day trying to mine that data, it's impossible. And organizations like EEISAC and MSISAC, they do a really good job of telling you that, a partner of theirs, so another utility says, hey, we saw this thing, let everybody know. Or we got attacked and they used this vector, let everybody know. And so it's really a grassroots type of control, while we're barely touching the surface of supply chain management and supply chain security. NIST and NERC, SIP are only just starting to say it is now a requirement that you talk to these third parties and you make sure that they're secure. Because the equipment that you get from them, when you plug it in, it's live. And if you don't know enough about it or can't trust it, and they don't know enough about it to be able to trust it, who did you let in?
Yeah, he makes a great point. So it definitely does start with secure supply chain management. And the other piece is, whatever devices that you utilize, if you're familiar with NERC-CIP, so they have 11 standards currently. They have 11 active standards, and one of those standards addresses vulnerability management, another one addresses secure baselining, and then NIST has secure baselines, or STIGs. If you've seen those, anybody can go out to disa.iase.mil. It's a good website where you can pull down a master list of STIGs. And sorry for speaking in acronyms. STIG means a Security Technical Implementation Guideline. So a Security Technical Implementation Guideline is a secure baseline for a certain operating system, or I think sometimes they get down to the hardware level, but most of it is software focused on security hardening. And so where I think the future is going is developing STIGs and secure baselines for PLC and ICS control devices. So that's definitely something that that the defense industry and the power industry and the internet backbone or CIIP industry is getting together on developing. So I think you'll see that grow in the future.
I'll add one thing to that, and it's really the simplest thing that I've seen other companies not do well. Do you even know what you have hardware and software-wise, and do you know what those vulnerabilities are? I mean, if we're talking just the SCADA, and then do you have it properly? I'm not going to say air gap because that's the wrong term, because almost everything is somehow connected in one form or another. But do you have it, I'll say at the network level, do you have it segmented properly where nothing can get back into it? I mean, if you start with, we'll just start with those three, you see a lot of the vulnerabilities go away. I'll throw out bringing in laptops and USB stuff, that goes with it. But if you don't start with those three, I mean, you're going to have issues anywhere.
Right, it does start with secure design as well, because air gap, we know, doesn't always work. So with a lot of you being students of cybersecurity, you probably learned or knew how Stuxnet worked, and that was a device that was targeting air gap systems. And then in 2008, it's not a secret, it's well published out there in several articles on the internet. 2008, the United States Army SIPRNet was hit by worms that were attacking USB devices and were being air gapped over. And so there's policy that you can put in place to prevent removable media onto air gap networks, but that doesn't always mean that it's the solution. So,
Well, and if your policies don't have any teeth, there's no.
yeah.
Right, you say we have a policy that says there will be no air gap transfer, and then someone does it, what's the repercussion? Do they get a slap on the wrist? Did somebody send out a yellow communication to say, hey, everybody, don't do this anymore? Or do they take action against that person to make sure that there's teeth to it? So, without that, you're counting on the good-natured policy following of your employees to do the right thing, right? Sometimes it's important, but sometimes that's not enough. The only other thing I'll add is that, for years we've been talking about cybersecurity being an IT problem. And in the public sector and in the semi-government private sector, which, public utility is, it's a boardroom problem now, right? It has to start at the top and work its way down. We can't continually ask for money for the devices that we need in order to protect ourselves and have to fight the battle to get it up to their level to prove why we need it. It should be coming down from them. They should be forcing us to make sure that we meet the minimum requirements to keep things safe and secure.
That's a trend I consistently notice, is that the teams are always saying, well, we need this, and the top level is not willing to provide what's needed in order to secure the environment. So with that, how can you manage that?
So that's a great question. You need to take the message and rewrite it so that you can communicate it with your board. You have to give them evidence of things that have happened to other organizations where they no longer exist because of a cybersecurity failure, or it was a catastrophic loss of resources, or of unfortunately life, whatever it takes to get the message sent to say that the DHS is now mandating more and more cyber controls across the government, and those are trickling down into the private-public partnerships that we've been building throughout the years. So when DHS says no more Kaspersky, I look at that and I say, do we have Kaspersky? Because if we do, and they can't trust it, I'm a critical infrastructure. I can't trust it either, right? And so if we have it, it's gone that day. Those are the kinds of things, but that message has to come from the top. The top has to say, we have a strategic directive that we will be cyber secure. And without that need, the cyber team will struggle.
And I'll piggyback on that. The perfect example just happened in the last month. Or I'll say the perfect bad example happened in the last month with Equifax. You should never have your CEO throwing one person under the bus. If the CEO, it trickles down, there's a trickle down, but somewhere something's lost in translation, because it shouldn't be one person's responsibility to update, all the servers. So that's just one example. You can go back and look. There's Target, there's TJ Maxx. There's all those where something was missed. The chain wasn't right, the reporting chain, because either they didn't know or they didn't want to know. So yeah, it does have to start at the top. The buck stops at the top, and either they have to be interested or they have to take ownership when it fails.
Do you guys notice now that they are, because of all these headlines and because of these horrific breaches that should not have happened, but they're in the news? Do you think that the awareness at the top level is changing, and they're realizing that they need to invest in their cyber and IT and infrastructure security?
I would speak on behalf of OPPD. One of our strategic directives is cybersecurity. So it is among the top 12 things that we're focusing on. And we do have the benefit of the entire leadership focusing in on our area amongst others. So, we've, like every company, I think, you work towards the goals of the business and you sacrifice the goals of IT, but that can only go for so long, right? Suddenly you've built up so much what you like to call technical debt that your systems are outdated, they're not functioning properly, and now there's this huge underpinning of the potential to have catastrophic, not even vulnerabilities, but just regular old failures. And that's another message that you have to push up to the top to say, we've got to work on infrastructure this year. I know you love to work on the customer side of it, and we need to do that too, but we need to focus a lot of those funds back now over here towards infrastructure, because without that, you can't support the other initiatives. And so OPPD, again, has a number of strategic initiatives. Cybersecurity is one of them, so they're taking it very seriously.
And I'll speak on behalf of the defense sector, or at least the Guard. Our job is, when it comes to cybersecurity, and I mean this facetiously, our job is easier because we have one primary focus, it's defense, right? It's defense, so security always wins. Security trumps everything. So I have many customers right now who I'm sure have emails in my inbox saying, hey, I can't access this website because we had to lock things down, right? So that's what happens. But if you go into any other industry other than defense, I think some of those analysts and some of that staff have it a lot harder because they do have to compete with, business leaders saying, well, some cybersecurity is a sunk cost, or hey, we can't spend this money on that particular item because we have another strategic objective that we want the company to achieve right now. So from my perspective in defense, we're pretty laser focused on what we need to do for security, but in some of the other industries, that's not the case.
Yeah, I mean, our number one is safety, public and private, our employees too. So that has to take number one, because especially with gas, water, yes, you have any regular. Gas is the big one where it's public and employee safety first, and then security is right there with it. That's both physical at the sites and cyber. So what you're saying, yeah, it makes sense. It does go hand in hand, where you do have other things that come into play, where, like you said, you guys are just worried about defense. And yeah, competing objectives is the fun one, because once at OPPD, I'm sure it still happens, but there's something the business unit wants rolled out, and they're already 3/4 of the way down the road before you get there. So what, do you stop it, or do you figure out how to make it as secure as possible? It really depends where it's at. So that's some of the stuff that, unfortunately, in college they can't teach you. How do you deal with the other business units, and how do you try and weave your way in there? And it's really about connection points at that point. Who do you know? Who can you hear? Who can you talk to? And who will tell you what's going on? Because even though you hear stuff from your peers, your IT group, they're not always the most knowledgeable in what's happening in the rest of the business.
So I think this part of it all is transparency. The organization has to have transparency. You have to have a certain methodology that you can move across the business so that everybody knows what everybody's doing, or that everybody could find out quickly what everybody's doing. To Jeff's point, every organization I've ever worked for had situations where the business is moving forward on something. Sometimes IT creates their own barriers, though, by putting processes in place that are so abhorrent that they would just as soon ask for forgiveness later than ask for help. And that's what puts IT in positions where they can now no longer have the flexibility or options to steer something a certain way. Now they have to react to it. And worst case is something's already rolled out that you find out about, then you say, I never would have done it that way. But there it is, and now how do you react to that? And so it's transparency, it's open communications between the business units, between the leadership on the way down, having a solid roadmap that you can give your employees once a year to say, this is the direction that we're heading. And if we sway from that direction, somebody needs to, let us know, and we can refocus. Make sure that our support mechanisms are in place so that when the business says we need something, we knew about it. If we didn't know about it, we can coach and guide them to make sure that we get involved in it earlier on. We do the same thing to them when we're changing systems over a Christmas weekend and all of a sudden something doesn't work. when they come back to work the next day, or the customers have been impacted and they didn't get notified, right? It goes both ways, and it's still something that I think a lot of organizations, if not all, have a certain amount of. And so that, that's one key takeaway from this whole thing. It's not just about the systems, it's about the business that those systems support.
Understood.
And when you communicate to the senior leadership to explain this could be an issue, you explain it in dollars and cents. That's what they understand. And say, oh, well, $10,000, but if you explain to them, well, you're going to lose $10 million if this happens, then that $10,000 doesn't look quite as big at that point.
Understood. To switch over, I guess not to shift lanes, still same topic, but to more on the actual security of ICS environments. I worked as an electrician, and my mentor and project manager boss, he was a controls guru with relay logic, and he was an excellent guy. And he told me a story prior to working at the company we were at. He went and he did some contract work at a gas facility in a rural area. It was a small, I don't know if it was a substation. We were in electric. What's a gas? Is it a substation?
I mean, might as well just call it that. I mean, I forget exactly what they call it. I mean, it's pretty much, it's a relay point where they...
Right, and he went to go do some work there, and I mean, just talking on the physical security, and he's not a security-minded person who's thinking about these things, but he brought up to me, he said, it was astounding, there was no security on this small facility. He said, I just put my hard hat in and walked in, my hard hat on and walked in. And I mean, that's terrifying. And when we're talking about the effects of this, I mean, the effects of IT breaches are already catastrophic enough with Equifax and things like that. I mean, when we're talking about things that can actually affect the physical realm, I mean, it is so critical and so terrifying. Another thing, my friend I went to school with, he told me there was an incident where a man and a rifle were able to knock out the power, but he shot at an electrical substation and was able to take out the power. This was in California. He did it like several times. Nobody caught him and nobody knew what it was. I'm not sure if you guys have heard of that or knew about that either. But when it comes to, I mean, how do we it has to be just a completely comprehensive approach, I mean, with physical and also IT and everything. How do we deal with things like that?
I'll start. I know a couple other things that, so shooting at stuff. You can't protect everything. That's just going to be facts. I know of, I'll say it was probably 7 years ago, there was somebody down in southeast Nebraska who went and shot at transformers. How are you going to protect that in the rural area? I mean, it's a cost versus what am I protecting? That's why when you said rural area, yes, am I concerned? How much money would they have to spend to protect? And that's really what they're going to look at. So they're going to protect the metropolitan areas first. That's where you're seeing the biggest, because that's where's the biggest loss of life going to happen if something happens. So I get that. I mean, I've gone on tours and like, hey, what about this and that? Even where I work now, not stuff that the person walking off the street is going to be able to get to, but me just seeing it, I have questions for my physical guys, and I get along well with them. Even when I was at OPD, same thing, I got along well with the physical guys, and I went to several sites with them when we had, I forget who even had in, it was basically audits coming in. I want to say it was DHS, but I don't remember. But yeah, it was just like, hey, I see this. Hey, look, somebody, the water wash away a hole under a fence. Could somebody crawl under there? Little things. So yes, there's concerns, but how do you protect everything from something that was probably built 60 or 70 years ago? That's the problem. But it doesn't mean you can't have monitoring devices on them. I mean, that's really what we're moving towards. It's hard to do because the cost of putting monitoring everywhere. And I'll say from the other side, people already complain about the bills going up. If we put monitoring everywhere, they really complain about the bills going up. So can it be done yet? But how do you do it and not impact all of your customers at the same time? So you try and hit the biggest points. Maybe that one in the rural, I mean, I don't even know what they would be putting through there on the gas, but I mean, if it was a small pipe, still to make it flat, there's lots of things where, yeah, it's bad, but it would have to build up. So what was the ventilation where he was at? I mean, if it's that one specific one's hard to address versus, I mean, the unfortunate one we had last year where the house exploded, where they ripped the stove off and didn't shut off the gas line. The people did that. That was horrible, but yeah, what could happen in that rural area if it was just a small environment? Same sort of thing potentially could happen, but also in those areas, you don't have flammable items in there.
The
So
only things that I wanted to add on to that are, you're dead on where an all-around good cybersecurity program will factor in traditional security or physical security. So if you're a cybersecurity analyst and you're not meeting with your physical security people on a regular basis or having them provide you with assessments like Jeff talked about, you should probably start, right? So traditional security is a big piece of cybersecurity, especially for infrastructure. And the only other thing that I would add is, again, to Jeff's point, really knowing the interdependencies of what is reliant upon that piece of infrastructure or that resource. That's really where you conduct your risk assessment and you say, hey, we really have to spend money on monitoring, this substation because it provides power or gas or water to X amount of people, or it may support a National Guard armory. So that's something that we factor in when we do our risk assessments. If OPPD couldn't supply power to an armory, what could we do to provide resources to Omaha should a tornado or natural disaster strike? Right. So really doing a solid risk assessment and knowing what interdependencies exist between all the critical infrastructures in that area, or the critical resources in that area, that's where you really make your money with cybersecurity, I think.
And I would add, it's your business's tolerance for the risk that you're trying to avoid as well. So tolerance is all about what should I spend versus what is the risk what is the cost of the risk, how much does it cost to prevent it versus what happens if it happens. So be interesting to know that as manufacturers realize that small caliber weapons could penetrate those types of devices, that they have made those devices more durable. So though the little can on your pole outside your house is probably still susceptible to small arms fire, those transformers that are out there are probably not. And they have also re-engineered the ceramics that protect things, but it's a deterrent, right? It's not be all end all. The farther you get away from the eyes and ears, the more likely it is that someone that's not a upstanding member of society may have a grudge or do something similar to that. I know there was a story a couple years ago up in Tacoma about a couple of guys who were disgruntled that took some razor wire and threw it over a fence into one of the small substations in town. Okay? How do you predict that that would happen? And then once it happens, how much do you spend to make sure it never happens again, knowing the likelihood of it ever happening again is almost zero? How do you tell your shareholders or the public you're going to invest a certain amount of money in something that may never happen? And to balance that out against the needs of safety, reliability, and low rates. So it's a business risk decision. That happens again. Let's go back to it. That happens at the board level, and the board tells you how much they're willing to tolerate, and then you design the best systems you can, given the risk tolerance that you're able to support.
Anybody else have a question?
I feel like I'm hijacking.
I'd be curious to know, just knowing what goes on in my own organization, but how much discussion there is about security baselines and the risk appetite. So providing context for not just your departments in cybersecurity, so obviously it's very important there, but across the organization, so that individuals everywhere can kind of be your eyes and ears to identify potential threats and vulnerabilities. Could you speak to just what happens within your respective organizations on that front?
I can lead off, actually.
Please do.
If you don't mind.
No, go ahead.
Because I'm going to answer his question with going back to risk assessment and policy. This is a very, very simple example, but it's important nonetheless. So we have a traditional security policy where every armor is locked, with the exception of recruiter stations, because you want people to come in and talk to recruiters all the time, right? Well, despite the policy and despite security inspections that occur frequently, you can probably still go out and find somebody who's wedged a doorstop into the armory door so that they can go in and out freely because maybe they forgot their keys, right? So to partly answer Captain Carlson's question, I think that a strong or well-resourced information assurance awareness program or training program is something that's important, not just to the defense industry, but to others, because those insider threats, the people who wedge the doors open, things like that, you have to address those somehow, and awareness and education is one of the leading ways to do that. So, sorry, but I just thought of that example.
Right.
So.
Well, and I agree, and I probably have a little bit more unique perspective than Mike does, because I was at the nuclear plant for several years. I will say that the nuclear side of it is probably 3 or 4 years ahead of where NERC is on everything, because, well, heck, I've been going 4.5 years now. We were already starting to do the whole chain for where are we getting our stuff from? Is it coming from China? Is it coming from the U.S.? Is it coming from, you know? So we were already down that road. I'm not saying it was in place yet, but it was already starting probably 5.5, 6 years ago. So my unique perspective on that is the nuclear side is probably far out in front on the infrastructure, on all of that. NERC is catching up, and I would say water and gas are behind it, but slowly catching up, only because, well, nuclear, far more fallout from that. Electrical has huge ramifications, not that water and gas don't, but almost everyone uses electricity if you're not living in the woods, so I think that's a fair assumption there. But to the question on the risk appetite, we're slowly developing it more where I'm at now. It's a hard one to push when people are just pushing stuff out and not thinking about the consequences. The best example I give you of using it is, it's not even in a security one, but it was a risk-based tolerance of, we don't take credit cards now as far as in-house. We push that out because I drew it up for them. I said, hey, what's our bread and butter? Gas and water. We're not a retail shop. We don't do this. Yet, we're housing all these credit cards, and this was years ago. I'm like, why should we keep housing the credit cards? If one breach happens, what's it going to cost us and all the people that paying us? So, yes, it's there. We haven't done it fully yet, but it's getting better.
From our perspective, you know, as a utility, it's all about safety. It's all about reliability. So while the line crews have a morning safety briefing where they talk about safety issues, concerns, things that have happened, we start to roll those types of processes throughout the organization, right? Every meeting now has an opening meeting where we talk about a little bit of safety. It embeds the culture in everyone's mind by the day. We're going to have an hour-long meeting about an application that we want to bring in. We're going to start with the safety room. Where are the fire exits? Where are the IED, the defibrillators? Those kinds of things. Safety culture comes naturally. We have SANS protecting the, what's it called? SANS
Security awareness training.
SANS security awareness training, it's another name for it anyway, but we subscribe to that and we freely offer those links to all of our users. We have annual training that they need to take and recertify on. It has a cyber component to it, so they know how to make sure that they don't have viruses on their portable media. And the closer you get to the more important parts of the organization, the steeper the learning curve, the more the qualifications you need to have. To Jeff's point, you get behind the fence in a nuclear facility and you rattle the wrong door, you're going to see a guy with a gun. They take it very seriously. We don't have to take it that seriously outside of those perimeters, but we still have escalating layers. And it all starts with cyber awareness training for our users. Why wouldn't you want to click on that link? We fish our users often to re-educate them on why they should have noticed that that email didn't look as legitimate as they maybe thought. Maybe they just missed it. Maybe they need to be retrained, and then maybe it was just a really good crafted email, which sometimes happens, that gets everybody. But those are the kinds of things, just continued awareness, and you know, I've heard said that some people don't even comprehend something unless you've said it to them 7 times. You just have to continue to give them the message. And when they go wrong, you don't punish them, you encourage them to get better. And that builds a good culture, that builds an open culture where everybody's now got everybody's back, and then it moves forward. But it's a constant battle, because our adversaries, they have all the time in the world to think of a brand new way of coming after us. And all we can do is react to it the first couple times we see it, so we can educate the workforce that these are the mechanisms that they're using.
That's something that worries me, and I realize it's not, you know, a threat that you know, OPPD or MUD may be specifically dealing with, but we know that at the nation state level, at the defense level, we know that our adversaries, like China and Russia, we know that they are doing reconnaissance on our grid. We know that they are trying to gather information. We know that they are trying to figure out everything they can about, you know, vendors and contractors and what products are in use. And they're trying to map out, you know, they're trying to map out our critical infrastructure. And why would they be doing that? Because
if you ever got to look at my edge firewalls, you wouldn't want to get out of bed. And I mean that. They're all coming after all of us every minute of every day, and they do it constantly. And all it takes is us to let our guard down for 1 second, and they're beyond that border, and now they're in somewhere else. And if they play it right, they could be in there for months. I mean, if you haven't not studied what happened at the Ukraine in 2015, please do. Because they were in from March, so they pulled the trigger right before Christmas. And when they pulled the trigger, they destroyed things. They didn't just, people didn't just lose power. They lost the ability to control those systems for years.
I heard they're still doing things manually now.
It's safe, right? I mean, you think, but I mean, the crux of it all right there is we try to engineer for convenience because it's technology, and that's what technology should be used for, right? For making our lives easier. But just enabling that technology, not to mention producing a bunch of YouTube videos that told everybody that you did enable that technology as well, which is another thing that they did in Ukraine, right? People on submarines have gone to prison for taking a selfie of themselves and showing the gear that was behind it. Just a picture of it.
It's serious business.
And they are watching 24/7, 365. 93% of every email that hits Omaha Public Power District is blocked. And that our total is about 400,000 emails a month.
And I can tell you, I mean, one of the advantages, I don't know if you guys are doing it, but that we put in was, I know where my boundaries are. I don't really have a need to have China hit me or Russia hit any of my sites. So pretty much anything outside the US, at least for our, I'm not saying email doesn't go back and forth, that's different, but as far as hitting us, nobody needs to hit us. So from my perspective, it's different than if I'm, well, let's say TD Ameritrade down the street where you don't know where anyone's going to be trading from. Totally different. I mean, like I said, it depends on, I know we're keeping this to SCADA, but I mean, it really depends on what industry you're in. Can you do some of those controls?
So backing away from the advanced, patient, persistent threats, your more your criminal gangs and your run-of-the-mill, you know, organized and capable, but not, you know, not to that level. Those threats, preventing those from getting on workstations. Like I know that you said, talking about segmentation of the critical control workstations. I mean, so they're not completely isolated from the internet.
No, you can't go to the internet on
Okay,
my
right,
stations.
okay.
You can, I guarantee you cannot get to the internet.
Okay. Just in that Robert M. Lee, he was mentioning that that's what the threats that he's been seeing is more traditional malware infiltrating computers, nothing specifically targeting SCADA or ICS, but managing to get within that organization. And that had me consider and think of, not piggybacking, but like third or fourth party, I think they call it, like where, okay, for example, like the Mirai botnet, that took over an existing IoT malware. From what I understand, that all these machines, all these IoT devices had already been compromised, and the Mirai botnet was able to take over that, completely destroy that original malware, and just using that vulnerability and that that level of access, it wiped out everything there and just took over like ruthlessly. So I guess I worry about common exploits or common vulnerabilities, common malware that, you know, just the right person might see and realize, oh, this is in an environment, and then start, you know, even to just start mapping it out and start figuring it out. I mean, I guess it's just the threat is just so huge, and the stakes are so high that it's just, I don't know what to do about it, you know, how to get into a position to do something about it, because it's huge.
Start with the basics. I mean, honestly, I mean, as my kid on, and you know, phishing or email is probably the #1 vector to get in. The other one is, what are your apps on the app that you have sitting on the outside? Because I will tell you this, the Chinese are relentless. If they find something, and I will say, I know firsthand, you want to bet who probably broke into Equifax? I'm going to guess it's the Chinese, and I'll say I know they've been hitting on struts for like 6 years now. So pretty good bet that the Chinese had some play in there. But to your point, if they're probably getting in, they're probably using social engineering. First off, they're probably going to LinkedIn or Facebook, more likely LinkedIn, who works at this company. If they're doing reconnaissance, that's what they're doing. They're targeting who's there, then they're going to see how are the email addresses set up if they can. Or they're just going to blast spam out. I've seen that too. I mean, so those are the two biggest threats. And there's things, I mean, my biggest concern for a time was old Office doc files. They were still a concern. I mean, now there's stuff where even the newer ones, I just read the other day, I can't remember what it was, there's something where, I can't remember, a newer one taking advantage of some of the embedded controls in the 2010, 2013 Office. So those are the things that, even if you get them not to click the spam, if they just get the email, there's some stuff now, you just get the email, you don't have to do anything, just preview the message, and it's going to ship you off to a site and do it. So how do you stop everything? It's hard. It's more, do you have things in place to detect if it does happen? Because they are relentless.
I mean, and that's like a huge benefit of our society and our culture in America is if, you know, open and LinkedIn is a fantastic resource, Facebook, fantastic resource, and you know, and it enables you to connect with others and grow professional relationships, and it's still beneficial, but it also leaves us open. I mean, I was personally thinking, I was like, if I ever had a job, you know, if I were to ever, you know, get a job at like Lockheed or anywhere like that, or if I were to get a clearance, I would want to not even have it on my face, on my LinkedIn. I wouldn't even want to put it out there, because of that risk of targeting, you know. It's that trade-off, you know, with our culture.
So you make a good point, because part of what we do in cybersecurity is asset protection, but another piece is information protection. Those are two very different things sometimes, but protecting information that could be seen as critical to another attack is just as important. So the example that I'll use is it was well known, I think it was about a year ago, I'm sorry, I can't remember the site, but the California Public Power District had stated that Iran or IP addresses from Iran, so they had traced it back to Iran and gotten well into their networks. Didn't do anything, right? So there was no actions taken, at least that they could find, and they did a pretty good job of scouring everything and monitoring. But what had been taken was a lot of information. So information on how their power grid was laid out. Now that information, when aggregated, could be used to formulate another future attack. So protection of information is just as important as asset protection. So you make a great point. There are different methods that you have to use to protect information versus assets. But again, that goes back to your policy and your focus and what the organization's risk appetite is.
I want to add one other thing, drawing back to information that goes out in the supply chain. This is one, the nuclear side was working on it again. We're working on it internal, but there's still stuff out there from years past. You're going out, hey, I need somebody to come in and upgrade this. We have Siemens PLCs, we have this, we have that. Removing that stuff is huge, because if it's out in the public, it's out in the public. So I know we're moving towards, actually we already did, hey, you're going to do this, you got to sign an NDA with us, but then you have the hop of what can somebody get to on their site, you know, so that's the big
Who are the subcontractors?
Right, who are the subcontractors, who else is doing it, and where does that spider out from? Who can get into their stuff? I mean, it's like the Target deal, really. It wasn't them, it was the cleaning company that let the people in, so those are the things that you can sort of control, but they're out of your control. All you can do is limit the information you provide.
We invest a lot of money on our cyber controls. This is just an example, but so does Johnson Controls. The subcontractors that implement what Johnson wants, and the subcontractor that subcontracts from that subcontractor to actually do the work, has access to all of that information, and they may not have any cyber control. So who are they going to go after? And this is DHS right now, NRC, NERC, they're all saying, look at your third-party providers, because they're not coming after you anymore. They're coming after your information through them. But it's your supply chain management that makes sure to hold them accountable for the same security controls that you would put in place yourself. And if they can't produce the evidence that they are protecting you, then you should not be, and it's just a hard one to say to Siemens or any SEL or anybody else, but if you're not doing what you're supposed to be doing, we're not doing business with you anymore. They'll get the message. They'll control their systems. In the meantime, a healthy level of paranoia. And I'm not worried about, again, I'm concerned about my stuff, but it doesn't frighten me. But all the other things outside of my control, they frighten me, because I don't know what their status is.
Another aspect that kind of rolls this all together is, and those of us who work in defense, operational security. It's just that information that is not classified, but when they start putting pieces, little pieces of information like that, it shows the overall operation or procedure and so forth. A classic example of that, there was a sheriff's department in Nebraska that had on their public website how many deputies they had assigned and what time their shift changes were. And you think about it, oh, shift changes at 4 o'clock. So we know where everybody is, so we'll commit a crime over this side of the county. And I mentioned that to one of our criminal justice instructors, and he goes, no, they didn't do that, did they? So, and fortunately, we got a hold of the webmaster and said, you need to collect the information down, because that puts your operation security in jeopardy at that point. For the panel, we're starting to run close to time here. As far as the IoT devices are concerned, where do you guys see that impact as far as infrastructure security, and what would you recommend to the manufacturers if you had 5 minutes to tell them what they need to do?
I'll speak to that just for the Nebraska Guard, because we do have, this is not to the level of ICS PLCs, but we do have a lot of monitoring for our facilities. So our facilities maintenance office, they sort of operate a small separate network. but that was the whole idea of having them operate on a separate network, because the defense network has some pretty stringent standards. For you to put new software or new hardware onto the defense network, you have to meet, secure supply chains if it's hardware, or it has to be approved software to be installed. So there was definitely a need. There was a need for facilities and maintenance management, but because it wasn't approved for our defense network, we would set up either ad hoc or separate networks completely separated. Right, so that's one small example of where you can still integrate things that are required for a business function, but have some level of protection just built in from the ground up. And then the other thing I would say is, going back to Mike's point, culture. So when you're ordering something or you're doing a new start project for devices, demand security. So one of the things that you can do is, if you hear people say smart grid, you can correct them and say, no, I call that the secure grid, and that's what it should be called. So you have to demand security from the ground up. But we don't protect ICS and PLC devices on the level that these two gentlemen do. Our networks are purely for HVAC system management and facilities management. But
I guess I would first start off by saying, I guarantee you that in my lifetime, Alexa will never operate a recloser. Okay? She will never be allowed to do that.
that's good.
Demand security from all of the vendors. Never accept ease of use over basic security. The devices that are coming out right now are making you turn off WPA and WPA2 on your own router so that they will interact. They're making you do that. If you have a security device on your wish list for Christmas, do some research. And if one of the first steps is, well, you're going to have to reset your router, and you're going to knock off all of the things that are using security, but you can reset those things to not use security too, please don't buy that product. If you buy that product, then they think it's okay, and they'll continue to manufacture those things. Don't buy IP cameras from China. Don't, I hope this doesn't go national, but think about that Lenovo laptop. Think about the chipsets that are inside them. Think about Kaspersky, whether they were guilty or not. Think about the level of impact that they have. If they are able to take all of the file names that they're scanning and forward them to someone else who could be ingesting them. And then they target the guy at home on his laptop. They don't target the NSA's firewalls, right? Those kinds of things. So if I had 5 minutes, it wouldn't take 5 minutes. Put security on your device or I'm not buying it. And I'm not recommending it to anybody. In fact, maybe we should be de-recommending those things. Maybe we should start our own national movement to say, nobody buy them, and force them to put basic security on those devices.
I agree 100%.
Yeah, and I'm shocked this hasn't happened elsewhere, but I mean, seeing botnet attacks, all it would take in the true smart grid area is someone to point it at the right spot. And I'm going to say right now, the worst would be an electrical utility. It's not, because of what else it controls. So I'll say right now, yes, we have generators on site. Without electricity, we're going to the generators to get water out and gas. So right there, I mean, if I were a bad guy and I had all the IoT devices, and let's say I knew OPPD was using the smart grid control two-way, I just flood them. I mean, it's not, I'd flood them, but I mean, take that with any electric utility. I mean, that's, so yeah, they're a danger. I mean, going back to the vendors, yeah, basic one-on-one security, how are you doing it? If it's not, and I agree with Mike, if it doesn't have the basic security set in there, why are you using it?
Yeah, I mean, so you're talking about adversaries that want to disrupt. If I wanted to go after a utility, I'd go after their billing system. I wouldn't waste my time with the wires and the radios and all that stuff. I'd find a way to get in and stop their ability to see who used one. They also have it, and you can't charge them. It's chaos. But public gets free electricity, they love it. And if you're a publicly owned entity, you're out of business. PG&E, they're gone, right? They're gone. Somebody would come in and say, well, you know, we can put a firewall in front of a server. Because that's the kind of, they're after the money, right? When you talk about the different levels of adversaries, the nation states, I'm sure they have a plan. I don't know what that plan is. I hope I never see what that plan is. They're doing a lot of investigating, they're probing, they're looking, right? They're not actively disrupting. The gangsters aren't going to actively disrupt, they're just going to try to find where they can make the money from it. So those are the systems you've got to protect, right? The malware pops up on your screen, give me 2 Bitcoin, I'll give it back to you, maybe. Let's make that go away. That's what we should be focusing on. Spend our money on securing our systems, right? SCADA, put it behind a real air-gapped network if you must, right? Control it, monitor it, maintain it. Every time somebody says it'll make it simpler, maybe you should take 2 steps back and say, well, what are we giving up for the simplicity of controls? Things that could disrupt or destroy your business.
Can I add on to that one thing? Because you hit it. I mean, you have secure, you have cheap, you have easy. They're in a triangle. Pick the one you want to focus on. And that's the deal, because it tugs the other 2. If you want easy, well, you're probably not going to be secure, and it's probably not going to cost. It may not cost, it may. But, I mean, my focus is on secure, which tugs the other 2. Maybe not as easy to implement, maybe not as cost effective, but I'd rather tug more on the secure line than the other 2.
Interestingly, there was an article I shared with my class. One of my students is in there, and we talked about this last night. Kaspersky, I think this is Information Security Magazine, inadvertently downloaded all the NSA tools.
Yeah.
Inadvertently.
End of 2015.
Yeah.
Oops. Yep.
So, and if you look at that, the government, DHS, as a matter of fact, Best Buy pulled all the Kaspersky off their shelves and will not sell it anymore. So it's.
I had concerns about Kaspersky back in 2014. I just didn't trust them with the way that Russia is and the way they control things. I had concerns from back then.
The interesting thing is the internet, of course, is global, but you have antivirus research companies like, so Avast is a well-known one, and it's centered out of Czech Republic. And Avast threat signatures, they get a lot of the Eastern European threat signatures first, because that's where they come from. So, and not to say that Avast is the point product or the best one in any way, but you do have regional antivirus firms who might see threats before other areas do. So, you know, not saying to pick one over the other in any way, but that's just something to consider.
One last question, panel. Do you participate in that regard?
Yes. And we're looking forward to another meeting at some point.
For those who may not be familiar, InfraGard is an organization run by the Federal Bureau of Investigation that covers all these areas, and they have ways of sharing information. If members on the East or West Coast are seeing anomalies, they'll post and say, hey, is anybody else seeing this? And so those of us in the Midwest can be a little bit better prepared. Okay. Any other questions for the panel? We're out of time. Well, I appreciate everybody coming here. Panelists, I really appreciate you taking time out of your busy day to come down and talk with us on this. And we did record the session, so if you want to link the session so you want to review what was discussed, please just drop me an email.
Okay, we'll do.